All right. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're going to go ahead and kick off. I think there is a little bit of a Teams issue kind of going on in the background. So if you aren't joining us live, thank you so much for watching and catching the recording for the first Friday in June. We're so excited and happy you're here. We've got an exciting conversation that we want to have with you all. And just wanted to say thank you so much for coming back month after month. And for those of you who joined us live and in person last month when we were all together in Vegas, we really appreciate that you all were there as well. So we will be posting lots of links in the chat as we go along for where you can find the recording, where you would be able to find more resources, including the slide deck and everything else that you all will want and know that and you will ask for, I'm sure. If you have any questions during this conversation, feel free to use across the top the Q&A options as you can, and then we will either answer them throughout the webinar, we'll take questions at the end if there's time, and if not, what we'll do is we'll kind of make a roundup and do a blog post kind of recapping it at the end. So thank you again so much for joining on this Friday. I don't know if you're all in summer mode yet, but hopefully you're not yet in summer mode and you're still thinking about what's next and you're curious about the conversations for comms. So, all right, with that, I'm going to pass it off over to John and Amy as they will be kicking off our conversation and kind of diving in deep a little bit today for our first Friday in June. John, Amy, feel free to say hello.
Great, thanks, Allison, and good morning. I thought we'd do a couple of intros here for myself and Amy, and then we'll jump right into the presentation, as Allison said. So I'm John Cerrone. I manage Microsoft's Global Executive and Employee Communications function. We call that Geek at Microsoft affectionately. And that's leading both internal employee comms across Microsoft, as well as the discipline of all the folks at Microsoft that do exec and employee comms. So Amy?
And I'm Amy Morris. I have the privilege of being on John's team and helping to manage that community of comms leads around the company, working with our product teams like Allison and the Viva Engage team. And I'm excited to chat with you all today.
So Amy and I have spent the last couple of weeks talking about, the First Friday event and what we thought would be most helpful for this group. We do a lot of customer presentations as part of our day jobs and talking to customers about their own journeys of transformation and some of the challenges they're facing as corporate communicators. And we get asked a lot of sort of similar questions across those various discussions. And so we thought for today's meeting, we would highlight some of the most commonly asked questions and sort of share some insights from inside Microsoft. But before kind of jumping into those sort of core questions, we wanted to ground this group with a few of the basics about Microsoft to help you understand kind of the context and sort of the corporate comms world that we're living in here and within the company. And so we often start with this slide, which really speaks to kind of the size and the scale and the different audiences in Microsoft that we have to consider from an employee comms perspective. And so, we're a 200,000 person, global enterprise-wide organization. We have 20,000 plus people managers at Microsoft. We have over 400 senior leaders, our executive staff members, our CEO, of course, and his 18 or so directs. And the reason we kind of often start with this view, which I think can be a helpful sort of view of how we think about the audiences, is because when you look at sort of Microsoft over the years and how the landscape has changed, how the company has evolved, and sort of where employees are getting information, what we find is that back in 2013, which was Steve Ballmer's last year as CEO, it was a real mixture of those internal and external channels. And in fact, back in 2013, it was really the external channels, things like press coverage and the stock price and analyst reports and family and friends that were driving a lot of those perceptions. Now, any company is going to have that dynamic where there are both inside and outside sources that are impacting employee perceptions. But as the employee comms leads on this call, you never want those external channels to be driving the majority of your employee narrative. And so By contrast, today, we feel much better, right? Today, on the right part of the slide, you can see the top 7 channels are all internal, and they're led by the voices of those 400 senior leaders, the voice of the CEO, of course, and those 20,000 plus people managers. And so if we just kind of pause there and look at that one single data point, you have to ask yourself, within Microsoft, or we did at least, are we resourced really to support, those audiences and those groups? And the reality was, back in like the 2018 timeframe or something, we were not organized that way. We of course had, a CEO comms director. There were some senior leaders that had employee comm support or comm support. And managers had their role, certainly in terms of, driving the business and doing, people reviews and budgeting and all of those things. But we didn't think of those groups as being key drivers of change or, key levers for communications. And so around 2018, after sort of seeing this data and sort of spending some time trying to understand the internal dynamics, we created this community we now call GEEK, which stands for Global Employee and Executive Communications. And it really is a community. Like all the words on this slide were chosen very intentionally. And the idea of it is more of a center of excellence. It's not a reporting organization. There are many, many people in GEEK, and they don't report into Amy or myself. We're all part of this sort of group together. And the whole point of the geek community is really to kind of bring folks that have the common sort of goal and job of employee engagement into one organization or one group where we can share information, best practices, you can crowdsource. We can really reach the comms leads through one Teams channel, one Viva Engage community. So when the company wants to drive change around a certain initiative, or there's a crisis in the moment, we have to share talking points on it quickly, we have a way to do that. So as simple in some ways as it sounds, like of course any large company would organize their comms folks into a community, and how else do you scale your work? We weren't doing that, 7 or 8 years ago. And so just that simple sort of, process of bringing folks together, trying to align behind a shared set of objectives is an incredibly powerful way to scale your impact, quickly. And so this is one, I think, key piece to know about our story. And so as we dive in today to some of the key core questions that you've all asked us over the last year or so, just kind of keep that in mind in terms of background dynamics. And so for today, our thought was to jump into these sort of 5 questions. These are the 5 questions that we get asked most often by customers and by our peers out there in the industry. And so we thought we'd just take them off one by one and talk you through kind of our observations, and would love to sort of hear your questions and your thoughts as we go through each one of these. So we thought we'd start with the question about, how do you measure what really matters? And when we were talking, Amy and I, about like, what's the right first question, this is the question that we get asked all the time. And that's probably come up in every single Reagan conference and PR conference that I've been to over the last 30 years of my career. And I've never really seen a very satisfying answer to this question, and I'm not promising that today's answer will be the right answer for all of you either, and we don't have the magic solution. We do, I think, have some interesting sort of observations and thoughts about how we think about this question in Microsoft. And so when we've seen this question discussed in other forums, the answer that we typically hear back is some sort of presentation or Power BI dashboard or scorecard that talks about channel metrics. How many clicks there were on a SharePoint site, how many people attended your all hands meeting, how many views there were on a video. And all those things do matter. We live in a world where we sort of measure our success by how many hearts and likes we get on our social media posts. And that all that stuff matters. It matters to all of us as comms folks to see how our channels, working, where are the eyeballs going, where is the impact. But at least within Microsoft, I think we wanted to up-level that conversation and think more about, what are the business challenges that the company is facing, and where can employee and exec comms play a role in supporting and driving change. And so we have worked very hard to partner with Microsoft's internal HR team that manages a lot of our people data. And we now have this thing we call our employee listening system that we're going to show you on this slide, which really is kind of the one slide view of how Microsoft sort of is able to understand how its employees are feeling, what they're talking about in different platforms, and then therefore where to focus a lot of our energy from a comms perspective. So when you look at this slide, it sort of has two components. On the left part of the slide, the things that are in purple are more of the quantitative, programmatic, survey-led tools that HR leads, right? We've always had surveys at Microsoft. I've been here for almost 34 years, my entire career. We had this survey called the Microsoft Poll for probably 30 years. It was a survey that every employee took once a year, incredibly useful and powerful tool to understand how individual teams are feeling. A once-a-year survey doesn't cut it anymore in today's world, right? There's too much going on. The pace is too fast. There's too many conversations happening in different forums. So you have to look for a model that has, more sort of platforms for listening, but also more real-time measurement. So today we have, our Microsoft poll has become a twice-a-year survey called Employee Signals. We have a daily survey that goes to it goes to a couple thousand employees every single day throughout the year to understand, like, what are they talking about? What are the themes that bubble up at a given point in time, given the current environment and the news. We have programmatic surveys on certain topics like benefits and comms and, performance and development. And then on the right part of the slide, it's more of the ambient social listening, right? So what are employees talking about on platforms like Viva Engage or third-party tools like Blind or Glassdoor? And it really is about trying to bring all that data together to sort of inform our leader communications. Now, within Microsoft, I feel like in terms of our journey, our success is helping the HR organization and the comms community understand this system. I think everyone in those two organizations understands the range of sources that are available to them, and they now have access to all this data. And those two things sound pretty easy, but in fact, they're hard to do, right? Organizations tend to hold on to information quite a bit. And so breaking those walls down has been a key part of the strategy. What we don't, I think, have yet is sort of a one dashboard that brings all of this together. So I think as we look at our own internal journey, that's one of the next steps for us. How do you take these disparate data sources and bring them together into one more powerful tool? So that's one piece of our story. I think another piece is that as important as all this data is to understand what are employees talking about, how are they feeling, how is the health of the organization, we also want to understand our communications impact and how are our different leaders performing in terms of the effectiveness of their communications. And so we do a once a year communication survey that is very much focused on executive and employee comms. And that measures the comms impact of our top, I think, 50 leaders against a set of benchmarks that you're seeing here. And so we're able to, every year, kind of at the mid-year fiscal year point, sort of look across our top 50 leaders and say, against these sort of core 15 or so attributes, here are the leaders that are performing the best, and here are the ones that are, struggling more or have some opportunities to sort of improve. And so, first of all, the power of comparison is incredibly helpful, but having direct benchmarks that measure communications impact and effectiveness is incredibly useful. So it's that combination for us of both the listening system, which is more of your broader employee perceptions, and these direct comm scores that really make a difference. And then ultimately, it's all these things that we're trying to look at. It's like, are employees thriving? Is there satisfaction with our communications? Do employees understand? Are they aware of our company key priorities? And have we built the right amount of trust internally and externally? And so that's all part of our measurement story. I think as you watch this journey for us this year, I think our goal is to bring it all together into one more unified view that makes it easier for comms folks to sort of drive insights and actions. But in terms of our own journey, we've come a long way from kind of the old days of a once a year survey. So wanted to share all that with you. Our next question is, how has our channel mix changed over time? So this often comes up in the context of, customer conversations when customers are looking at deploying a new version of SharePoint, or they want to look at the Viva C&C suite, Viva Engage, amplifying connections, or they're going to license Copilot for the first time and they're trying to understand how to do that. And so, we, just like all of you, are a customer in some ways of Microsoft or customer zero. So we have our own comms challenges in the company that we're trying to address and understand and figure out. So the channels that we choose to use really are based off of the challenges that we're facing and the goals that we have. We don't adopt channels just because Microsoft produces them. And so when we look at our own internal data, I mentioned the comms survey earlier, and we try and understand, within Microsoft, for the leaders that have the best communication scores, what are they doing well? It's these four things, right? They're being authentic in their comms and they build trust with their organizations. They've created community and connection for the employees in their organization. They drive clarity around their strategy and they are a thought leader. And so, and it turns out that of those four dynamics, it's the very first one. It is the building of trust that proves to be kind of the key magic ingredient. And in fact, over the last 4 years or so, the importance of trust has only continued to get more important every year. Now, we don't really know exactly why that is. I think we suspect it's something about this kind of data. This is a slide from the Edelman Trust Barometer that just got released last month. And no surprise to folks on this call, there are a lot of concerns around trust in this world right now. People have a difficult time trusting their politicians, trusting their leaders, trusting institutions. And so, when you have an organization or a leader that's really built a trusted relationship, that's an incredibly powerful dynamic to leverage from a communication standpoint. And so, when we look at that within Microsoft and we think about, okay, well, if trust proves to be the magical ingredient, how do you build trust? It turns out in Microsoft, it's these four things. It's being authentic. It's addressing topics employees care about in a timely fashion. It's creating an environment that welcomes and embraces open and transparent communication, and it's listening. And those four things all sound relatively simple. They're only a few words on the slide, but in fact, they all require a lot of intentionality and they're really kind of hard to do. And so, but for when you do all those things well, they really seem to build that sort of trust factor that's so important and help to drive a dialogue that, for many organizations is key to driving change. So today at Microsoft, when you go back and ask our initial question of what are the voices that matter most and what are the channels that have the most impact, it is, again, those 400 senior leaders, the CEO, and those managers at Microsoft. They're really having the outsized influence. And the channels that matter most or are the most effective are that mixture of town halls and AMAs. Think of town halls as sort of leader-led. They're often sort of information sharing opportunities, a lot of presentations, whereas an AMA, which is an Ask Me Anything, is all about trying to address the questions that are on employees' minds. Email is still, of course, widely used at Microsoft, and number 3 is Viva Engage. And of those channels I just mentioned, AMAs and Viva Engage weren't even things we did 3 or 4 years ago. So being at the top of the list 3 years later, I think speaks to the fact that those kinds of channels are really good at doing the things I mentioned earlier, being authentic, taking on the topics that employees care about in a timely way, creating that open environment and dialogue that you want, and listening. And so if you take one thing I think away from today's conversation, it really is sort of this dynamic, the importance of building trust, listening, having two-way conversation. That really is the most important thing in terms of driving change. And probably for us in our own journey is the most marked difference, sort of in the pre-pandemic world and kind of now. Pre-pandemic, it was a lot of email, SharePoint sites, and all hands. We love all those things still. We use plenty of those channels still. But really today it's about sort of all the things you're seeing here. And so kind of the last slide to close out this section is that's all a lot of theory, a lot of data, a lot of thoughts on sort of what matters at Microsoft. What does it look like practically? This is a one-slide view of what Satya, our CEO, does from an employee comms perspective. We have 400 leaders. They have very different authentic styles, very different scopes and scales of their work. And so Every leader's, mix will look somewhat different, but this is a pretty good model that you can assume is widely used at Microsoft. So in the case of Satya, he almost never sends all company mail, probably a couple a year, and they're very news specific, like a change in leadership or an acquisition. He, of course, is on social platforms like LinkedIn, and employees may or may not follow him there. He does take part in some of his directs all hands throughout the year as a way to get deeper into certain lines of the business. He might attend the HR all hands or the gaming all hands, etc. He has a couple keynotes a year that he does for customers and partners that are key moments for company strategy. We encourage all employees to watch those moments because they're so important to the company's overall story. But his most important channels are the top two things here. It's Viva Engage and his town halls. He has 6 town halls a year. They're 45 minutes. About 2/3 of those 45 minutes are dedicated to Q&A. Q&A, in that case, it's highly curated, run by an employee moderator, but that reflects kind of what are employees talking about, both the challenging questions and sort of the questions that we want to plant and drive, I think, across the organization. And then, of course, Viva Engage, which is really integrated into Teams. It's very easy for folks to access. This is part of their daily work. It's where people's eyeballs are all day long as they go through their day of virtual meetings. And it's a great way for him to scale his thoughts with the broad employee base. And so this mix, although it varies by leader in the company, is quite reflective of the principles I mentioned earlier, the idea of two-way dialogue and listening and building trust, and has proven, I think, for us to be, the magic kind of secret sauce in evolving our approach to leader comms over the last few years. That's a quick tour of our leader space. And now I'm going to pass it off to Amy to cover question number 3.
Thanks, John. So John talked a lot about, leaning into two-way dialogue. And when you do that, you have to balance, the risk, both the risks and the rewards of creating that sort of open and transparent space for employees. We know that, answers to questions need to be really meaningful, and we don't always have a very, satisfying and meaningful answer. But we do have some learnings that we can share with you about how our approach to managing that risk and balancing with the rewards, things that we've learned over the last couple of years. The world today, I think, as we are all navigating, and especially the workplace, is increasingly complex and dynamic. And we are a very large global company with issues, many issues that impact our employees, that they care about, that they activate around. And we've seen, a lot of global disruption, geopolitical situations that have come up over the last several years. So while we've created these opportunities for employees to ask hard questions of leaders and get answers, it also creates an opportunity for conversations on workplace platforms like Viva Engage, like some of these digital spaces, to have sort of outsized reach across the company. So I would say we've learned quite a bit over the last couple of years, particularly as we started to see a lot of questions and comments from our employees on the Middle East conflict that broke out in late 2023. We've, kind of approached our two-way dialogue strategy and our internal communications on Viva Engage with a really strong proactive strategy. So we use this as a tool to facilitate that two-way engagement at scale from leaders. We've opened up opportunities for employees to hear from a wide variety of leaders on the platform, leaders that they might not otherwise get to see quite so visibly. We know it's a great tool to really foster that sense of culture and community. And we're really using Viva Engage as our platform to prioritize news and information for our employees. And as John mentioned when he talked about our listening systems, we had always had, monitoring for sentiment, kind of seeing what topics are trending, what employees were chattering about on the platform. But we didn't have a strong approach to that sort of content moderation, employee activism, where employees start to use these digital surfaces to sometimes agitate in the system. So I just wanted to share, a few tips and learnings that we've had. We had some learnings around how we manage wide audiences and large communities, and making sure that, similar to the days of email, your average employee, can't just send an all company email on whatever topic that they want to. Similarly, we've made some changes across our Viva Engage platform. We also knew we had to clarify for employees, what are the behavior expectations? How can you make sure that your conversations are aligned with, our Microsoft values of accountability, integrity, and respect? And we learned a lot about how to better leverage a tool like Viva Engage as a listening system. We worked really closely with the Viva Engage team across and communications teams as well, to develop some better features on this platform that help us not only tap into what employee, trending themes and what employees are talking about, but what are they saying on these sort of topics that, we know that they care about, that we can identify what are some of the hotspots of conversations, and how can we make sure that those conversations stay in places where employees are opting into them, as opposed to, landing outside of the platform and landing in a bunch of other folks' inboxes and getting that amplification. So this is an AI-driven dashboard. The Within the Viva Engage platform, within the communications dashboard space, it allows us to go input themes that we care about, both from a positive and sort of really critical negative perspective. So you could imagine we put in culture themes. We want to understand how, our AI transformation journey is landing with employees, how that sort of contagion effect of Copilot usage is landing across the company, as well as, different geopolitical themes or some of those more disruptive topics, so that we can not only address, these questions as they come up and understand if there's a significant volume of questions and address them in some of these other forums, but we can make sure, again, that those conversations are happening in a safe way for the employees that are opting in, and not, disruptive to other employees. It's been a pretty big learning for us. So we've had to create criteria for how we evaluate this content, for how we consider moderating, putting in place different processes for folks to review. And I would say from a monitoring perspective as well, it's given us just richer insights to understand what our employees care about at scale. And yes, it is live now, so we're excited for other folks to kind of start to test this feature and learn from you all as well. Back over to John.
Thank you. Okay, so question number 4. So how do we so one question we get asked a lot is, there's so much information, there's so many, pings in Teams and in chat, and there's how do you possibly keep on top of this? And employees often complain about the volume of email that's being sent to them, and all of that. And so I think our first answer to this is we're never going to raise our hand as the employee comms team to solve the problem of information overload. Like, that is the world that we all live in. Information comes from millions of sources, and that's just not going to be something that you can solve or want to put on your review as a thing you want to try and go after. I think what we do, raise our hand for is to say, what we can do as the employee comms leaders is we can use our channels, use our megaphone, use our leader voices to prioritize the right information for employees, so that information sort of pops and gets highlighted in the right places. And so we do a lot of work with our communications leaders here to better understand the news environment and what are the priorities for the company and what are the challenges that we're trying to solve. And so, of course, we do things like calendars for editorial and all the tactical things that you have to do when you're a comms leader to understand just the calendar of news and, all the mechanics. But at the highest level, what we have a process at Microsoft that really kind of is led by the very top of our communications discipline. So Frank Shaw runs comms for Microsoft. He's our CVP. He runs a twice-a-year motion called the News Review. It's a news review for it's for 6 months essentially, and so we do it every sort of June and July for the last half of the calendar year, and every December and January for the first half of the calendar year. And the point of the news review is to get all of the marketing leaders together, look at all the news coming out for the coming 6 months, and then unpack that. Try and align things where it makes sense. Try and understand what are the most important breakthrough news moments for the company that you want to highlight and marshal your comms resources behind. Where is there just sort of too much stuff coming at people at one point in time? So the air traffic control stuff. And all of it. It also provides visibility in terms of what's coming across those sort of key marketing leaders. And so that's very much of an external news rhythm, looking at sort of all of the outside news that the company wants to deliver. At the same time, we also run a similar process with our HR counterparts and others for employees. And there it's the same model, 6 months in advance. We kind of look at what is all the employee news coming up. This is everything from, learning and skilling to D&I motions to benefits changes to sort of, culture work the company's doing. And we try and, in a sense, do it at the same time Frank is running his news rhythm. So twice a year, we all come together and essentially can bring together the external news with the internal news. And then what that becomes is our employee news agenda for the coming 6 months that we can then bring to the geek community to really kind of align and drive a lot of our comms work. What you're seeing here is a sample of like an older version of our news agenda. The top half of it is going to highlight some of the bigger external news moments for the 6 month period. This is back in 2024. And the bottom half are some of those internal moments. Now, does this calendar show you every single thing that we're doing that employees are hearing about in the 6 month period? Lord, no. But it does represent sort of the bigger things that we had to focus on and the things we were trying to get the geek function to align behind from a communications perspective. And so even though, there's things that still come up that somehow don't make it into this process, this at least gets the comms team out of that rhythm of being an order taker. And I would say one of my experiences at Microsoft is that in a comms role, it often feels like you're at the drive-through at a fast food restaurant, and you're just getting any program lead at Microsoft that has a dollar and a dream, to use a phrase from a colleague of mine, is able to come to the comms team and say, "I'm launching a program in October. I've got $30,000 to do my communications. I need your team's help." And so, of course, you try and be helpful, but then what you end up with is a whole bunch of like tactics and programs that you're landing throughout the year and a big messy calendar through programs. So this kind of elevated formal process that really happens, at the program level, but then ultimately gets packaged up and shared with leaders is a way to align leaders and the comms function behind a news agenda for the company and drive priorities. So at the end of the day, we found this sort of formal planning process to be incredibly helpful across both air traffic control, across using our channels in the most powerful way and aligning, what is very a limited, comms resource environment now against the most important things. So I wanted to share that kind of process with you. And that brings us to our last and kind of my biggest question here, which I'll pass off to Amy.
It wouldn't be a first Friday without addressing what about AI? I think, we're all for the last couple of years in this space where we're thinking about how do we adopt new AI tools for Microsoft as a company. We are in this transformation of really becoming an AI first company. And I think, this all started, I think, with the launch of ChatGPT in late 2022. Everybody suddenly had access to this generative AI, and the world didn't really know what to do with it. So for us at Microsoft, we call this the era of AI. And I think of this as I'm going to go down two different paths with you today. One is how did we land this AI transformation with employees? How do we make sure that they have access to the skills and resources that they need in order to upskill and leverage AI in their day-to-day work? As well as, as John mentioned, we have a large discipline of communicators across Microsoft. So how can we make sure that we are incorporating the best AI tools within our workflows and upskilling the geek community as well and providing those resources? So when we think about our employees, again, going back to that sort of holistic listening system, we partnered with our HR teams to understand how they were going to measure how we're landing AI with our employees. And we're able to really map out these three pillars. So AI understanding, AI learning, and how employees are incorporating AI tools within their day-to-day work. Our HR teams are also measuring how these efforts align with employees thriving, right? That's kind of our top level metric for how we measure employee sentiment. So that AI understanding bucket is really all about our transformation as a company. What is our AI strategy? This aligns very well with those key priority news moments that John was talking about and leveraging the right mix of leader voices to really land those news moments. Access to AI learning and skilling, which looks different across the many different types of roles that we have here at Microsoft. So how can we make sure that employees are really easily able to navigate and find those learning and skilling resources, understand the AI solutions that are most appropriate for their role, as well as find elevating those AI tools and opportunities for employees to leverage. If you use the Microsoft products, then you know we've got a Copilot just about everywhere. How can we make it really clear for our employees, that which tool when story, making it really relevant for them, depending on what type of role they have, leveraging storytelling and community building. So we now know from our data that there's a real contagion effect. Folks that evangelize, their own examples of how they're using AI can really impact adoption across, their teams and their network. So knowing that those are our three pillars, like I mentioned, we focus really leaning into our comms principles and things like two-way dialogue and trust, focusing our leader-led comms tied to those priority news moments, showcasing our AI vision and strategy. We're highlighting those real AI use cases, both within the geek community and to employees to, tap into that contagion effect, and then connecting AI and career development much more directly. So highlighting AI opportunities within existing learning and skilling resources that are available to employees, becoming much more connected across our different platforms. So I'm going to shift gears and talk a little bit more about how we're leveraging new AI tools within our comms function and for employee and exec comms and across our geek community as well. We've been experimenting, like I said, for a couple of years here, and the latest evolution of what we call our Comms Copilot is this Comms Copilot 1.8. This is the tool available to our communications org at Microsoft, as well as to our geek community, which taps into as an agent, instead of just going to Copilot, which is going to sort of serve a wider function, this is going to give me prompts, resources, and opportunities to kind of tap into these things that are very specific to comms at Microsoft. So whether that's testing messages in a way that's aligned with the key messages we're trying to land as a company, testing or creating metaphors. We use a lot of metaphors to really land some of these complex technical types of topics. Prep for an interview with media, get some inspiration for social, and we've done a click down of this type of an agent for the geek community as well, which we've got two actually, the geek prompt coach and the geek Q&A agent. So how can we take some of those really specific comms agentic features and make them even more specific for our geek community? Knowing that we use that community to scale a lot of these really big, meaty topics that we're trying to prioritize for employees, making that a knowledge source for these agents so that as a member of the geek community, I know I can go use this agent to either help me create a great prompt which I'll get into a couple examples of prompting, or to find the resources and the information that I need in a quick way, knowing that it's only going to pull from these approved sort of knowledge sources. We've also experimented with some of these daily reminders or weekly reminders. So within the comms org, we've done 2 rounds of a monthly version of a daily prompt. So landing every single day a prompt, sort of a anywhere from like a lightweight to a really kind of more heavyweight type of prompt to inspire people. And then we've been sharing weekly with the community as well. So this has been a way to kind of keep AI and keep this experimentation top of mind for folks, and something that I think could be easily repeatable in your organization. If you haven't already experimented with the Copilot Lab, this is sort of a great curation of different prompts across different roles, and we are continuing to add more and more prompts for folks in comms roles, including the employee and exec comms function. So if you, I think this may be a clickable link. If not, we can drop it in the chat. But if you check out Copilot Prompt Lab, these prompts are going to be these really specific to drafting an internal comms plan, or typing up reactive talking points using a knowledge source, a document that we've written with lots of those key messages that we're trying to land across the company. So I'm going to just go ahead. I know we're getting close to time, so I'm going to run you through one example that I find to be really, really helpful and really an impressive use of these Copilot prompts. So I think as John mentioned, we're looking across our HR programs. What are we trying to land? So let's say we need to roll out a new benefit or a new policy. Here, I am going to show you how we use the Copilot prompt directly within PowerPoint. So I can go to that Copilot feature, access that prompt. I can edit it and customize it and add a reference doc with all of the details. Copilot can really quickly get to work ingesting all of that information in the document and start to build the plan. It's going to start by showing me an outline, so I have a sense of where it's going to start to build. It's, as you can see here, it's doing what I've asked it to do. I'm asking for, specific elements of a comms plan, specific messaging by audience. And it's going to start to now build out those slides and the speaker notes, as well as, I can see the outline here. And this happens really quite quickly, much more quickly than I would be able to do it manually. So now we've got all of those slides. It's got speaker notes in there with a deeper level of detail. And it's also maintaining that original document's privacy label. Because this is all sensitive, this is confidential information, and so it's maintaining that sensitivity and privacy from the document that it's sourcing from. So this gives me, gets me to a starting point much more quickly. Of course, I'm the human in the loop, so I'm going to go through, I'm going to refine, I'm going to make sure that I do, editing and add my expertise, making sure it aligns with the plan from HR, making, avoiding any jargon and fine tuning some of those details. So this is sort of one example of how we're using AI to accelerate our work in internal comms. You can imagine, you could do this across many different types of programs or culture initiatives where you're taking a large amount of information from multiple sources and consolidating it for a comms plan and giving you a great starting point. We, like I mentioned, have a lot of complex topics that our employees care about. And as we do address them through, facilitating two-way dialogue between our employees and leaders, we want to make sure that leaders feel really well equipped to address these topics in a consistent way. So employees feel heard, leaders feel really confident that they're sharing the right level of information with employees. And we put together what we call the Employee Hot Topics document, which is a starting point for leaders, right? So it's sort of that base level messaging. And, you may think, okay, well, I don't want to just be repeating and kind of spitting out the same message as every leader. So using this as a reference doc, you can also use Copilot directly in Word. and ask Copilot to draft the reactive talking points using this document as a knowledge source. We have a suggested prompt within our Copilot lab that I talked about earlier. This could also apply to many different scenarios, right? So if your leader is going into a Q&A on a specific topic, you can feed it that information as well. Copilot's going to synthesize the guidance in this document, pull out the key messages that are appropriate for the scenario that I've given it, and give me a message that's in, my leader's voice and appropriate for their response. So with that, another question that we get is, how can I use AI to accelerate this work that I do to create messages within my leader voice? We are just starting to experiment, and we've had some folks that have done this with a lot of success with creating an agent that helps you build communications in your leader's voice, but that also is following communications guidance and company guidelines. So I'm not going to walk too deeply into this. This will be included as a takeaway, but this is sort of a framework that we've built that you can experiment with through Copilot Lab as well, creating an agent for your leader. So what we've learned about, how to use these agents is they're really, really strong in specific use cases. So, if you are supporting a leader in their communications, you're going to have a wide variety of comms in their voice available to you, and you can put all of that together into a knowledge source and start to build an agent that can help you now create from that existing messaging, from comms guidance that you've created or someone at your company has created. Maybe you have writing guidelines or voice guidelines, and you can start to include some of these. You can feed the Copilot agent information about who your leader is, what their communication style is, details about their organization, what are the problems you're trying to solve, and then it suggests some of these prompts as well, and do some of this testing so that you can kind of see how quickly you can get from all of that knowledge and information that you have to writing a newsletter from your leader, or even an org-wide email on strategy updates if you've got all of that information. So those are some of the ways that we're experimenting. I definitely encourage you to check out the Copilot prompt gallery for comms. We are continuing to update this as we are learning and experimenting as well. And I think with that, I will turn it over to Allison to see if we've got some questions.
Yes. Thank you both so much for going through, what was it, the top 5 questions that everybody, all of our customers ask you. Yes, give them a round of applause. That was a great whirlwind tour of all sorts of things. Thank you so much. If you join midway through, we'll definitely send you the recording. We've got a couple of wrap-up things, but first, before we go, I have a couple of surprises too, so don't leave yet. But first, we do have a question in the chat that I think is an interesting one for you and John too. Is there any other ways? I know we kind of landed with how you're using AI in a variety of different ways, but any other kind of AI aha moments in kind of maybe the earlier questions, maybe with the news cycle or the events that you're hosting, things like that?
I think, go ahead, John.
No, go ahead. It's fine. You can go first.
I think what we found, so John mentioned that we do this annual comms survey. In survey questions, the data points you get from those questions are really interesting, but there's a lot of rich data in verbatims. So when I think back to last year when we were analyzing those verbatims, we're collecting data from employees that are giving us feedback on their communications from many, many different leaders, like over 30. And so as you're kind of digging into those verbatims, it took us a pretty long time to dive in and analyze them. This year, we actually fed that through Copilot. So we both had the quantitative data from the survey plus the qualitative data from the verbatims, and we were able to get to those insights and themes much more quickly, which allowed us to kind of take that survey data and package it up and get it to those leaders' comms teams much more quickly. And so I think that sort of analysis and pulling out of the themes has been something that's really kind of accelerated how quickly we can move.
Right.
Yeah. And I would just add to that and say that no chuckles, please, Allison and Amy. That, for me, one of the most important things with the AI transformation has been the permission to experiment and the encouragement to like learn and try. At least for me, I'm not somebody who naturally loves to adopt new tools super quickly. I tend to be more of a reluctant adopter, and this is one of those cases where I feel like the more that I use it, I'm amazed at how many things it can do and how efficient it is. Whether it's analyzing all the sentiment from a CEO town hall, whether it's helping to write my team's performance reviews, whether it's writing my sort of team's strategy memo for the year. It's building a plan for an HR benefits change. Like just the speed and the quality of what comes out of Copilot for me has been quite impressive. And it's just taking the time to lean in and try, which, again, for me as somebody that holds back on these things isn't natural, but when I do it, the value is like instantly evident. So I would just encourage you all to not only like try it yourselves, but to make the space for your teams and your coworkers to also lean in because the value is quite apparent kind of the moment you use it.
Love it. Thank you so much. I'm going to drop in, or if somebody wants to drop in a couple of links, this is not the last conversation that we hope to have with you all. We have lots of different opportunities. If you all are managing a frontline in 2 weeks, or actually I think in 3 weeks, we have a dedicated session for Corp Comms and the frontline where we'll be going in. And then we have not only this presentation, but our other First Friday presentations all listed on the Modern Employee Comms site as well. And then just to close out a little bit of fun, thank you so much for staying, but we wanted to celebrate John. I actually have a party hat. Oh, can you see it? He is celebrating 34 years at Microsoft and also a birthday this week. So thank you so much, John, for all your leadership, the thought leadership that you share with our customers and with our internal teams. We're so thankful for all the things that you do and you share in all of the leadership. And I will definitely wear my party hat for the rest of this. So yes, I hope you never forgive me. It's fine. That's so funny. Teams is like soaking it up. So thank you and happy birthday to John. And for the rest of you, we will see you in August. We're going to take a break for July because First Friday is July 4th in the US. So we'll take a break for July and we will see you all in August. And stay tuned to the blog for more and for the recording for this as well. All right, everyone. Thanks so much.